Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into something called learning experience design.
Or LXD for short.
Right, LXD. Have you ever spent, like, hours online trying to learn something?
But you just end up
Yeah, but just end up feeling like you learned absolutely nothing.
totally.
Well, that's the problem LXD is trying to solve.
It's a big problem nowadays.
Yeah, and to help us understand it, we're diving into chapter 5 of this book on LXD. I think it's mainly for people who work in education and training.
Yeah, professionals in those fields.
Exactly. So the book tackles this challenge of how to design learning that actually sticks,
And keeps people engaged.
especially in a world that just keeps changing so
Right,
fast.
like how do you keep up?
Exactly. So this chapter starts off with this military analogy.
The fog of war.
Okay, I get the fog of war concept, but what does that have to do with learning?
Well, imagine you're a battlefield commander,
Right.
right? You're just overwhelmed with all this information, and you're trying to make the best decisions you can.
So it's like there's not enough information to make a good decision.
Well, originally, yeah, it was about not having enough information. But today, we're facing the opposite problem. We're drowning in data,
Yeah.
but we're often starved for actual knowledge. It's
Huh.
like we have all this information, but it doesn't translate into something we can actually use.
So it's like we're overwhelmed.
Exactly. It's a new kind of confusion.
So too much information, not too little.
Exactly. And the book actually talks about the negative impacts of this information overload, like decreased productivity.
Oh, I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, and then there's difficulty focusing and even making bad decisions because you just don't know what information to trust.
That makes a lot of sense. So how does LXD help us cut through all this fog?
Well, LXD recognizes that learning in this complex world requires a different approach. It's not just about cramming information into people's heads.
So it's not just about like lectures and textbooks and stuff.
Yeah. Right. It's more about creating the right conditions for people to learn and, more importantly, to actually use what they learn.
Like setting the stage.
Yeah, exactly. Or think of it like designing a theme park for your brain.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
You want the experience to be engaging, memorable, and make you want to come back for more.
So you're saying learning should be fun.
It should be, yeah. It should be something you look forward to, not something you dread.
That makes a lot of sense. So how is this LXD different from the way we traditionally think about instructional design?
Well, traditional instructional design often focuses on what content needs to be taught. But LXD kind of flips the script and puts the learner's experience front and center.
So it's more about the how.
Yes.
Hmm.
And it draws inspiration from something called user-centered design. You've probably heard of that.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, so it's all about really understanding the learner's needs and designing the experience around them.
You know what? That reminds me of something I read in the book. There's this quote by Michelle Cottrell Williams, who was actually named Virginia State Teacher of the Year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she says, if you can Google it, don't waste time teaching it. You should be facilitating their learning.
I love that quote.
So it sounds like LXD is less about straight teaching and more about guiding and facilitating.
Absolutely. It's about shifting from seeing the teacher as the holder of all knowledge to more of a facilitator.
Like a guide.
Yes, a guide.
Yeah.
Helping learners navigate this complex information landscape and actually make sense of it all.
That's really interesting. One thing that really stood out to me in this chapter was how LXD pulls ideas from all these unexpected places.
It's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, it's like this multidisciplinary mix.
Exactly. And recognizes that to really understand how people learn, you need to look beyond traditional education boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So it draws upon ideas from marketing, experience design, even behavioral economics.
Wait, behavioral economics, what does that have to do with learning?
We'll get into that later. Oh, and it also uses ideas from human systems integration, or HSI.
HSI.
Yeah, don't worry. We'll unpack all of that.
Oh, good, because that sounds pretty complex. But let's start with marketing. That seems like the biggest jump. How does marketing apply to learning?
Well, think about what good marketers do.
Right.
They really understand their target audience, their motivations, their needs.
Yeah.
They know how to craft messages that resonate, that are memorable. LXD borrows those principles to create learning experiences that are genuinely engaging and connect with learners on a deeper level.
So instead of just, throwing information at people, you're trying to understand what makes them tick.
Exactly. You want to make sure the information is actually relevant to their lives and presented in a way that they'll actually remember.
That's a really good point. Okay, I see how marketing fits in, but what about designing a theme park? How does that relate to designing a learning experience?
Well, experience design is all about crafting holistic, engaging experiences.
Mm.
And these experiences go beyond just the purely cognitive.
So it's not just about thinking,
No, it's about feeling. It's about
about
doing
immersive experiences.
exactly. Think about the last time you went to a really amazing theme park, right? You weren't just passively observing. You were part of the story. You were feeling the emotions. You were creating memories.
You are having fun.
Exactly. And LXD aims to bring that same level of engagement to learning. You want to make it memorable, impactful.
So instead of just reading a textbook, you're saying I should be like dropped into a virtual escape room and have to solve physics problems to get out?
Well, it doesn't have to be that dramatic, but you get the idea, right?
I do.
It's about appealing to a whole person, not just their intellect.
That's a really cool concept. Okay, so we've covered marketing and experience design. What about behavioral economics? How does that factor in?
Well, behavioral economics is all about understanding how humans actually make decisions.
And we don't always make the best decisions.
We don't know. We have biases, we have these mental shortcuts, and we're influenced by all sorts of subtle things. LXD takes these insights and uses them to design more effective learning experiences.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, remember those nudges we talked about earlier?
Oh, yeah?
Well, that's a great example of behavioral economics in action. Small changes can make a big difference.
Like, instead of just telling me to study, you'd put a sign on my refrigerator that says 90% of people who ace this test studied for at least 3 hours.
Exactly. It's about working with our natural tendencies instead of fighting against them.
So even in learning, a little peer pressure can be effective.
It can be, yeah.
Mm.
And then finally, there's HSI, human systems integration. Think of it this way. Imagine learning to code, right?
Okay.
This new skill doesn't exist in isolation. It impacts your career choices, your social interactions, even your hobbies. HSI helps us understand these interconnected impacts.
So it's like a ripple effect?
Exactly. It's about seeing the bigger picture, how this one learning experience fits into the larger context of a learner's work, life, or organization.
So it's not just about the individual, it's about the system.
Right. And all of these different perspectives, all of these different disciplines come together to make LXD so innovative. And don't worry, we'll break down all these concepts and make them easy to understand and apply.
I'm already feeling inspired. Let's move on to the practical advice this book offers based on all these different perspectives.
Let's do it. So, are you ready to dive into some practical LXD advice you can actually use?
Absolutely. Give it to me straight.
The first recommendation is to focus on real goals. Sounds pretty simple, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, isn't the goal always just to learn something new? What else is there?
Well, it's easy to get caught up in the specifics, like mastering a particular skill or just finishing a course. But for learning to be truly effective, it needs a deeper purpose.
Okay, so what do you mean?
Well, the book uses the example of like compliance training.
Okay.
So you take the course, you learn the rules, but what's the real goal? Is it to avoid getting sued?
Hmm.
To create a safer workplace?
To actually change people's behavior.
Exactly. That's where your focus needs to be. What are you really trying to achieve with this learning?
So before we even think about the how, we need to step back and ask why.
Exactly. Start with the big picture.
Okay, I can see how that would make a big difference. What's the next recommendation?
Embrace a holistic, user-centered approach.
Okay, remind me what that means again?
Sure. Remember, LXD is all about understanding the learner and designing for their unique needs. So that means considering the whole person, their emotions, motivations, even their confidence levels.
Right, right. It's not just about delivering information efficiently, it's about creating an experience that actually connects with the learner.
Exactly. You want them to feel something, not just memorize facts.
Makes sense. What else?
Okay, this one's important. Design for real, flawed humans.
Oh, here come the behavioral economics.
You got it.
Uh-huh.
Remember we talked about how we're not always rational?
Yeah, we definitely have our quirks.
We do. We have biases, we take mental shortcuts, and we're swayed by all these subtle things.
Mhm.
And LXD acknowledges those imperfections and actually uses them to its advantage.
So work with our natural tendencies instead of fighting against them.
Exactly. It's kind of like those nudges we were talking about.
Oh, right.
Little
Sure.
things that can make a big difference.
Like, I'm already thinking about how I can redesign my study space, make it more engaging.
That's a great idea. And it actually ties in perfectly with the next recommendation. Think about the entire learning experience.
Okay.
It's not just about individual lessons or activities. It's about how everything connects to create a cohesive journey.
So it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey.
Yes. Think about the overall message you're trying to convey and how each piece contributes to the whole.
So it's like planning a road trip. You don't just randomly pick destinations, you think about the whole route, the stops along the way.
Exactly. You want everything to flow together seamlessly.
Okay, got it. What else?
And finally, we need to consider the systems level view. Remember HSI?
Human systems integration, right?
Yes. How does this learning experience fit into the larger context of the learner's life, their work, their organization? What are the ripple effects? What are the potential, unintended consequences?
Right, thinking big picture. So if I'm getting this right, to design effective learning experiences, we need to focus on real goals, take a holistic, user-centered approach, design for real, flawed humans, consider the entire learning experience, and adopt a systems-level view. That's a lot to remember.
It is, but it's a powerful checklist.
Yeah,
And when you combine all these elements, you can create learning experiences that are not just effective, but also engaging, memorable, and truly impactful.
I like it.
The source material concludes with this thought-provoking idea. Beautiful things work better.
Interesting. What does that have to do with learning?
Well, it suggests that aesthetics aren't just about making things pretty. They actually play a role in how well things function, how we perceive them, and ultimately how we learn.
So the way information is presented, the learning environment, the overall feel of the experience, it all matters.
Exactly. And this brings us to a final thought for you to ponder. Think about your own learning environment. Does it inspire you? Does it make you feel motivated and engaged?
Or is it just a place where I go to, get stuff done?
Exactly. Even small changes to your environment can significantly impact how you feel and learn. This has been a really fascinating deep dive into LXD.
I'm feeling super inspired to rethink my whole approach to learning.
That's great to hear. But before we wrap up, is there anything else you think our listeners should keep in mind as they start their own LXD journeys?
Definitely. Keep in mind, this is just a starting point. There's so much more to discover within LXD.
So it's like opening a door to a whole new world.
It is. The key is to just stay curious, keep experimenting with different approaches, and see what works best for you,
It's not about finding that one-size-fits-all solution.
right? Because there isn't one.
It's about figuring out what works for you as an individual. Exactly. Just like no two learners are the same, no two learning experiences should be identical.
That makes sense.
So embrace that flexibility LXD offers, that creativity, and don't be afraid to kind of, challenge the traditional ways of thinking about learning.
I like that, empowering learners to take control of their own journey.
Yes. Create something that truly works for them.
So as we wrap up, can you remind us of those key takeaways we talked about today?
Absolutely. Remember to focus on those real goals. What are you really trying to achieve?
Right. The why behind the learning.
And then adopt that holistic, user-centered approach.
Designing for the whole person.
Right. And then embrace our beautiful human imperfections.
We're not robots.
We're not. And lastly, don't forget to zoom out. Consider the bigger system at play.
Right, that systems level view.
Exactly.
This has been an amazing deep dive into LXD. I'm feeling so inspired to rethink how I approach learning. And before we let our listeners go, let's leave them with that final thought-provoking idea from the book.
Beautiful things work better.
What a concept.
So challenge yourself, How can you make your learning environment more aesthetically pleasing, more engaging? Does your study space inspire you?
Does it reflect your personality and your unique learning style?
It's easy to kind of overlook those things, those aesthetic details, but as we've learned today, they can make a huge difference.
A huge thank you to you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of LXE.
My pleasure.
It's been really eye-opening, and I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to level up their own learning experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, in a world overflowing with information, knowing how to learn effectively is just as important as what you learn.
So true. Keep diving deep, everyone, and keep those learning fires burning.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Until next time, happy learning, everyone!